Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all very much for joining us today and for being here. Joining me are Senator Jim Broshin from Baltimore County, Roberta Roper, who really is the mother of the victims' rights movement in our state after the shocking and tragic death of her daughter Stephanie. Thank you for joining us. Rich Liotta and Marcy Goldman, the parents of Noah Liotta, a hero who was killed in the line of duty by a drunk driver. They fought so hard and did such an incredible job to get a tougher drunk driving law that we enacted last year as Noah's Law. We also have Wicomico Sheriff Mike Lewis and Sergeant David Owens here with us, who led the investigation into the tragic murder of Sarah Foxwell in 2009. I want to welcome all of our state's attorneys who have joined us today, law enforcement officials, legislators, and especially I want to acknowledge all of our victims' assistance professionals who are here with us today, the advocates, the counselors, and so many others who are on the front lines each and every day assisting the victims of crime and their loved ones. On behalf of the citizens of the state, I want to really thank all of you for the selfless and critically important work that you do. Making Maryland safer begins with making sure that we have a criminal justice system which holds offenders accountable for their actions and the harm that they cause, while also including victims and the community in the process of healing. We've been working tirelessly to ensure that victims of crime have the right to information, the right to be present, the right to provide input, the right to receive restitution, and perhaps most importantly, the expectation that they're going to be treated with dignity and the respect that they deserve. Last April, I convened the very first Governor's Statewide Victims Conference to recognize all of those who've contributed so much to the victims' rights movement here in Maryland and to enable everyone to share ideas and resources among the many service providers. And we recently announced $46 million in grants to directly aid victims of crime. That $46 million enabled us to fully fund all of the eligible funding requests that we received from victim service providers all across Maryland, from one end of the state to the other. Every single one of them is fully funded. Last year, together with our friends that were here in the legislature and a lot of hard work from many of you in the room, together we enacted the Justice Reinvestment Act, which accomplishes a lot of things, and one of them is that it holds offenders accountable for their crimes. Also will hold government agencies responsible for administering justice and getting results. Justice Reinvestment Act contains key provisions that strengthen victims' rights. It requires the withholding of inmate earnings in order to pay restitution. It required an in-depth examination of our existing system of restitution so we can make certain that criminal offenders pay victims back for the financial losses caused by the offender's actions. And our administration remains strongly committed to delivering justice for the victims of crime. My governor's office of Crime Control and Prevention just partnered with the Office of the Attorney General to survey 135 law enforcement agencies on how they were handling sexual assault evidence kits to ensure that justice is served in each and every case of sexual assault so that we can avoid some of the serious problems that Baltimore County has recently been experiencing. We look forward to working with the legislature to make progress on this issue. In addition, today, I am announcing our Justice for Victims initiative, which will include several pieces of legislation to help reduce the number of future crime victims and to help protect our most vulnerable citizens. The first part of our plan is the Repeat Sexual Predator Prevention Act of 2017. This is a bipartisan measure modeled after Senator Broshin's prior bad acts bill. It will allow a court to admit evidence of a defendant's prior history of sexual assaults. during prosecution for subsequent sexual offenses. We all know that sexual predators follow patterns of behavior and that a single victim is often not the perpetrator's only victim. Many of you know the story of Sarah Foxwell. Wycomico County Sheriff Mike Lewis and Sergeant David Lewis worked her case. Sarah was brutally murdered by an individual who had previously been convicted of sexual offenses, but in the subsequent cases, prosecutors could not introduce the evidence of these previous crimes. This predator should have been behind bars and taken off the streets long before Sarah ever became a victim. We also introduced the Protecting Victims of Sex Trafficking Act of 2017. In 2014, the Victim Services Committee of our Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force specifically identified 396 survivors of human trafficking in Maryland. 124 of them were trafficked as children. Our proposed legislation will further define sexual abuse to include sex trafficking, regardless of whether the sexual abuse was committed by a parent or any other person who has permanent or temporary care or responsibility for the supervision of the child. Currently, in order for law enforcement to investigate an allegation of child sexual abuse or be able to provide services to a victim, a local Department of Social Services must have evidence that the alleged perpetrator was the victim's parent, family, or household member. But in sex trafficking cases, the relationship between the victim and the trafficker is rarely that clear-cut. Our legislation will finally permit local victim service providers to immediately respond to trafficking allegations, to work with law enforcement, and to provide services to these victims. Third piece of our Justice for Victims initiative is the Transitional Housing Assistance Program. We are directing, just to begin, $5 million in new funding resources to provide up to 1 year of transitional housing assistance, specifically for individuals who are victimized by crime. It will be coordinated by the Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention, the Department of Human Resources, and the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. Individuals, particularly the victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, and abused or neglected youth who are aging out of foster care, face homelessness as a result of becoming isolated from support networks. With this funding, we will provide these victims an opportunity to have a safe environment and to help them begin to heal and rebuild. As I mentioned a moment ago, last year we were proud to enact Noah's Law, which, thanks to the hard work of his parents, now requires ignition interlock devices for anyone convicted of drunk driving in Maryland, and it is already saving the lives of Marylanders. But in order to continue our efforts to hold even more drunk driving offenders accountable, today we are proposing the Repeat Drunk Driving Offenders Act of 2017, which will carry a felony offense punishable by up to 10 years for anyone who has been convicted of a drunk or drugged driving offense on 3 or more occasions, as well as any individual convicted of causing a death or a life-threatening injury on a second and or subsequent offense. Impaired driving crashes account for 1/3 of all traffic-related fatalities, and the average drunk driver has driven under the influence 80 times before their first arrest. We know that individuals with previous drunk driving offenses on their record are much more likely to repeat the behavior than those with no offenses. Right now, the maximum sentence available to judges is 3 years, regardless of whether it's someone's 3rd or 20th drunk driving offense. Our new Repeat Drunk Driving Offenders Act of 2017 will help ensure that moving forward, we have more tools at our disposal to hold these offenders accountable for their crimes, while also helping to protect future victims, future potential victims of crime, of repeat drunk drivers. The Justice for Victims initiative that we are introducing today is bipartisan, common sense legislation that will help protect the most vulnerable among us, improve services for the victims of crime, and help us reduce and prevent the number of future victims of crime. We look forward to working with the legislature in a bipartisan manner to enact these common sense proposals. Thank you very much.